Grace and peace to you from God our Father and God's beloved Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Raise your hand if you consider yourself to be a gardener. If you have and maintain actively a garden. All right, we got a handful. How many of you are not exactly gardeners, but you can manage to keep a fern alive? A few more of you. Okay, confession time. How many of you manage to kill any plant you touch? You're my people. Because I do too. Thank you for being honest. The worst moment that I had in high school biology was when Mrs. Schultz told us that in order to pass the class, we had to keep a plant alive for an entire quarter. It was a total nightmare. When I helped with VBS last summer, Sarah Harris got me a succulent, right, like a cactus. Succulents are supposed to be the easiest thing to keep alive ever. And so at this point in the sermon, my plan had been to pull it out for you and show you how almost dead it was. But ironically, or maybe just appropriately, as I was editing my sermon, I managed to take my arm and knock it off my desk, breaking the pot, and that was the end of the cactus. So, sorry, Sarah. Gardening is not my fine point. But I do know a few things, at least in theory, if not in practice. For example, I managed to convince my father to compost, because that's good for plants, right? And so now he is all about it. Sort of. By which I mean he composts, but he does it in his own way, which is not actually proper composting. Instead, what he does is he'll take all the old fruits and vegetables from the kitchen, he'll dump them in a hole in the ground and call it good. As it turns out, that's not exactly how you're supposed to compost. And so every year, there's like the official garden, and then they have the compost pits. And every year, the compost pit is a total surprise. One year they get potatoes, the next year they get squash or pumpkin. They always have an exciting adventure waiting to see what is going to grow. But the minor miracle there is that something does indeed grow each year. Somehow these little seeds from rotting vegetables that have received no care at all survive, and they transform from something dead and rotten into something alive, something that provides nourishment. It's just that my parents never quite know what it's going to be. And nature is full of examples like this, right? Leaves fall, trees seem to die, they bud in the spring, hopefully soon. Circle of life and all that, right? This is how things work. Nature has tons of examples of death and rebirth, over and over again. So what about us? In his letter to the church in Corinth, Paul is answering that very question. He says, "But someone will ask, how are the dead raised? With what kind of body do they come?" And then Paul, perhaps not the gentlest of souls, replies, "Fool, what you sow does not come to life until it dies." And he continues, "But God gives it a body as God has chosen, and to each kind of seed its own body. So it is with the resurrection of the dead." And lest we agree with Paul about the foolishness of those ignorant Corinthians, I want to cut them a little bit of slack. It's not really surprising that they didn't quite understand what was up with this whole resurrection thing, because it wasn't a new concept. The Pharisees believed in it, and some others as well. But for a church in Corinth, in Greece, the concept may have been confusing, because for the most part, ancient belief in the afterlife involved you wandering around after death as a shade or a shadow in a place that wasn't terrible, but wasn't great either. And so people were looking at this promise of resurrection and were confused about what it actually means. Like, are the dead coming back like tomorrow? Is it like resurrection the way that Jesus was resurrected, where he comes back and you can see the wounds of the body and then he disappears to heaven again? Is it like resurrection, like new zombie apocalypse, right? Like, what does all of this even mean? And so Paul responds with this. "So it is with the resurrection of the dead. What is sown is perishable, and what is raised is imperishable. It is sown in dishonor, it is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. It is sown a physical body, it is raised a spiritual body. If there's a physical body, then there's also a spiritual body." Crystal clear, huh? I'm not quite sure that that's the answer for which the good people of Corinth had hoped. I probably would have heard all that and then made a face and raised my hand and been like, so, zombie apocalypse, yes or no? Because what happens after death, frankly, isn't clear. I mean, how could it be? So I can't say that Paul's answer exactly gives me a clear picture, but what it does give me is hope. Hope that just like a seed dies and seems lifeless, we too will be reborn. We don't know how, we might look the same, we might not, but we know that all of the things that we face in this life, perishability, dishonor, weakness, our physical shortcomings, all of those things will be and are being transformed by God's saving grace, by Christ's life, death, and resurrection. So resurrection, no matter what it looks like, sounds great to me. But the dying part, that part's not so easy, is it? How many of us have had a friend or a loved one who's at the end of their life and just seems to keep clinging on, who seem to wait until a particular friend or family member shows up, or until one of us gives them permission, until we actually say, it's okay. It's okay to let go. It's okay to die. Death is not always easy, and it's certainly not easy to let those we love go. But although, like the church of Corinth, we're not exactly sure how this resurrection thing is going to play out, we know that we can trust in God. And we know that we too rest in the hope of new life. And that is good news. But it's important to remember that Christ didn't just come and live and die only for the sake of our afterlife, right? Christ's redeeming work starts right here, right now. It starts during our own lives. And so the good news for us is also this. Just as God is able to resurrect a physical body, God is able to resurrect other parts of our lives as well. But resurrection occurs after death, not before. So sometimes this means that we have to surrender parts of ourselves or parts of our lives first. Sometimes we have to let the vegetables rot. Sometimes we have to allow parts of ourselves or parts of our lives to die. And so my question for you today is this. What is there in your life that you might need to allow to die in order for God to resurrect it? What is there in your life that you might need to allow to die so that God can resurrect it? There are lots of possibilities. Maybe what we need to let die is something to which we've been clinging so tightly, something that we hold on to simply because we aren't willing to trust God with the outcome. Maybe it's our perfectionism, or maybe that's just mine. Maybe it's our need for control. Maybe it's guilt. Maybe it's fear of what the future holds. Maybe it's our anger at a particular person or event, anger that might be justified, but that we need to let go of, to allow to die so that we can fully live. What is it for you? Maybe we need to let something die so that a relationship can heal, a grudge maybe, a long-standing argument, the need to always be right. Maybe it's a former part of your life, something you used to have or used to be. Maybe it's something that your body used to be able to do but just can't anymore. It might be a goal. It could be a dream. I wish we could say that we lived in a Disney princess movie where dreams always work out and come true and woodland creatures show up periodically to clean my house for me. But sometimes they don't. And if you cling to a dream that's not for you, then the reality is you might miss an even better calling that God has for you. God can take our goals and our dreams that have died and resurrect them, creating new and better things for us, things that look radically different from what we started with. It doesn't mean that we're going to be free from pain or that things will be easy along the way, but as Christians, we place our trust in a story that moves again and again from death to life, from weakness to power, from dishonor to glory. What are you called to let go of? What are you called to give up or to give into or to change? I encourage you to pray about it, to ask God what needs to be resurrected in your own life, in your life of discipleship. It's hard when it's something that you love or something that you don't love, but you've just invested in. Letting something die isn't easy, but it is part of life. And if that was the whole story, if we simply returned to dust, then the sermon would end and we'd all pass the Kleenex around. But it's not, because God has redeemed our story. We are called to trust God even if we don't know what is going to happen. Because if God can raise the dead and turn compost into cucumbers, then God is capable of resurrecting, restoring, and redeeming the dead and withered parts of our lives here on earth as well. Amen.